so much. Now that we are recording, we can go ahead and get started. Very quickly, today's agenda will cover the following. We'll give a brief background of the fund. We'll talk about our funding model and the folks that make the funding decisions. We'll review the grant making programs that the fund has. We'll do an in-depth overview of the fund's spring general grant cycle, which is why you all are here. We'll actually go over the cycle timeline and the application. And like I mentioned earlier, we'll have time at the end for Q&A. All right. Oh, I'm sorry. You were not seeing the agenda. So this is the agenda. All right. So the team. Now that we've gotten the housekeeping and the agenda out of the way, hello everyone. Again, welcome. Good morning. Thank you for being here and sharing in this space with us. My name is Tanya. My pronouns are she, her, ella. I'm the grants associate at the fund. Like I mentioned, I have a few colleagues with me here today supporting, and I'll let them introduce themselves as well.
Hi everyone, my name is Kathleen Knight. My pronouns are she, her, and Aya, and I'm the capacity building manager with the Fund for Santa Barbara. We'll talk more about that program in a moment, but super excited that you're all here today.
Nancy?
Hi everyone, my name is Nancy and I'm the grant making intern for the fund. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm excited to be here with you as well.
Yes, and in addition to the two wonderful humans I have with me today, on the screen you can see the rest of the team. Marco is the executive director, Patricia the associate director, Alina, who if you've signed up to our listserv, you receive all of the emails from, and Kristen, who actually just left, but we miss her dearly, and David, who is in charge of the Youth Making Change program, which I will also be touching on in a little bit. In addition to the team, another group body of the fund that I'm going to be discussing today is going to be the grant making committee. And I will share more about what the grant making committee is and what they do, but I do see that we have at least one committee member here with us today, and I'm going to give her the opportunity to introduce herself. Suzanne, do you want to say hi?
Hello. My name is Suzanne. I'm in my actually, I guess my 6th year with the fund, and I am currently the liaison to the board.
Thank you, Suzanne, for being here. And Suzanne will more than likely chime in throughout the presentation in case I miss anything. So we appreciate her input. In addition to Suzanne, we have the co-chairs, Rachel and Feliciano. Like she said, liaison to the board, Suzanne, and then board liaison to the GMC is Susan Wax, and then the rest of the committee member names are there. And if you'd like to learn more about the committee members, we do have their bios up on our website, so you can visit our website and learn more about them. All right. Quickly, just
I'll add a tip there for the folks that it's helpful to know who the readers are going to be for your proposal. So getting familiar with those of us on the committee may help you in crafting your narrative so that you know who your readers are and what their areas of expertise are.
Thanks, Suzanne. And yeah, and I'll mention more about that in a second, but the office hours currently for the fund offices, both offices are open. Well, actually one's open Monday through Thursday, the other Tuesday through Thursday, 9 to 5. If you are planning on visiting us either North County or South County, I encourage you to call ahead of time to be sure someone's there to greet you when you arrive. All right. We're going to jump into the history of the fund. So the fund is a non-traditional community foundation that was funded in 1980 that supports organizations and groups working for progressive social change in Santa Barbara County. Through its mission, the fund advances progressive change by strengthening movements for economic, environmental, political, racial, and social justice. You may have seen the mission on the welcome screen when I had it up earlier. We were founded in like the post-civil rights era. Our founders were all supporters and activists of different social justice movements, like, for example, the Chicano rights movement or the feminist movement. And through their activism, they learned that foundations almost never supported their activist-led progressive type of work. And they learned about the systems of oppression that the world of within the world of philanthropy, and they sought to create an alternative funding model. So that is how the fund was born. Kathleen, do you want to talk more about the fund?
Yeah, thank you. So the first thing to know about the fund is that we're a pretty unique organization, and we're, as Tanya mentioned, a non-traditional funding source. So we're actually a fundraising nonprofit, which means that unlike most foundations that have a large underwriter or endowment, we actually fundraise the budget that we grant to the community annually. And although we do have a small endowment, we're really proud of the support that comes from over 900 individual donors. And as part of our commitment to our work and our fundraising model is that we ask a lot of questions when taking private dollars. We really expect our donors to walk their talk so that there aren't any strings attached to the dollars that we receive and give out. To us, fundraising is organizing, and this helps keep us in tune with the organizations that we support. This is the reason that we doubled our grants during the 2007 recession and tripled our emerging needs grant budget in 2020 at the start of the pandemic. The second thing to note about the fund is that we are unabashedly progressive. So we do not pretend to be neutral, and our motto is change, not charity. And in action, this looks like our understanding that social conditions improve most dramatically when those who have been denied power and justice lead on their own behalf to confront, challenge, and change the conditions that have denied them access to justice and equity. So therefore, our mission is directly looking to support systemic social change projects that address the systemic root causes of social inequities and the underlying conditions and circumstances that bring them about. So you can think of these as root causes and systemic change. And we emphasize funding projects that address systemic change rather than direct service. An example of this would be direct service being a soup kitchen versus advocacy for a living wage ordinance or advocating against unjust evictions. And given that our social change agenda, the Grant-Making Committee prioritizes groups that lack access to more traditional sources of funding, as Tanya mentioned, or that use strategies that are typically overlooked by mainstream philanthropy, like legal strategies, lobbying, direct actions, policy and advocacy type work. And that being said, we know that there is no black and white line about what constitutes direct service versus social change. Sometimes the most basic charity work is actually a social change idea, depending on what else is happening in the community. We believe the context is everything, and we are responsive to it.
Sorry, I muted myself. I woke up with a little tickle in my throat today. But that brings us over to our activist-led grant-making model. Thank you, Kathleen. So, more about the grant-making committee. We are the only foundation in Santa Barbara County that uses this participatory decision-making with the final funding coming solely from the grant-making committee. Fund staff like myself and Kathleen don't have the authority to make grants. This allows us to be able to provide technical support to applicants like yourselves, and to hopefully have you all think of staff as an ally in your approach to the GMC. I'll talk about some of the ways that we support during the grant application process that you can take advantage of, and in a little bit. The grant-making committee itself is an inspired group of volunteers with deep roots in our communities. They represent the entire region from North County all the way to South County and everything in between. They are community activists who understand the of, by, and for approach to support historically marginalized community members. They have a range of expertise on issues that affect our communities and bring their unique insights to the deliberation process. They are your audience when writing a grant proposal to the fund. like Suzanne mentioned. And the reason why we share all of this with you is, like Suzanne mentioned, so that you can get to know your audience and learn more about them, so that you have an idea of who is going to be the folks that are going to be reading the proposals and making the funding decisions. Nancy's going to put the link in the chat so you can learn more about each of them individually.
Now, here at the fund, we employ several strategies in order to advance our mission of supporting movements for social change. So the first, which is what we're best known for and why you're here today, is grant making. But there are also other ways that we support groups outside of traditional funding. The first of that is through building capacity of progressive organizations to help them be bold and effective. So this is our capacity building program. And what does this look like? Well, we host workshops and convenings like our funders briefings and activist brown bag lunches, which I'll share more about in a moment. We offer things like direct consulting and an online community calendar where you can promote your upcoming events. We also have information libraries with books on best practices for organizations and other topics that you can borrow. Another strategy we employ is nurturing coalitions. So the Fund for Santa Barbara serves as a hub for convening collaborative efforts and serving as a trusted table to convene people and groups for strategy, resource sharing, and inspiration. We have several successful examples of this, like the Central Coast Immigrant Rights Coalition and our Economic Justice Working Group. Another strategy we employ is influencing philanthropy. So like Tanya mentioned, as a non-traditional funding source, we do our part to advocate for more progressive approaches to philanthropy to support community organizing and movement building. And what does this look like? Well, that's like unrestricted funding, access to resources for grassroots-led work. We like to think of this as growing the pie rather than creating more slices. We also emphasize leadership development so that social justice movements and the progressive philanthropy sector look like the communities that we serve: diverse, intergenerational, and values-driven. From our Youth Making Change program to our internship program, the grant making committee, the board of directors, and our staff, we really emphasize this point. Something we've also been working on this year is our regional equity study, which is a bi-county-wide community-based research project to understand the inequities within Santa Barbara County and Ventura counties. So not only is this a synthesis of census data, but we also really emphasize input from a participatory community process. So there's many issue areas that are highlighted in this report and strong data, and we really encourage you to engage with the report and utilize the data to your advantage, to leverage funding, resources, connections in your own work and network, as well as to help you fulfill your mission. We're actually putting together a regional equity initiative, and we encourage all of you to join us. And as I mentioned, we also have an activist brown bag lunch group as part of our capacity building program. So this is a monthly convening of local activists, organizers, community members, and neighbors working for social change and justice. This is a free-flowing space for us to come together to seek resources and support and engage with advocacy work. And this takes place the last Thursday of the month from 12 to 1:30 p.m. And if you're interested in joining us, I highly encourage you to reach out to me. Nancy will put the email for that in the chat as well.
Lovely. Okay, thank you, Kathleen. Now we're going to start diving a little bit deeper into grant making at the fund. So this is a brief overview of the grant making programs that are available at the fund. We have a single year grant that is offered twice per year in the spring and in the fall. Currently, you all are here for the spring general grant cycle. The maximum grant amount for that is $10,000, and the length of the funding available is for 12 months. We have a multi-year grant that is typically offered in the fall, along with the fall general grant cycle, and the maximum amount to request for that is $10,000 for up to 3 years. So $30,000 max total for the 3 years. And those funds are dispersed annually. And then we have an emerging needs grant that is up to $5,000 for unforeseen circumstances, available on a rolling basis until funds are depleted. We currently have $30,000 in that pot, so that is also an option for organizations. And finally, Youth Making Change has 2 boards. We have a North County and a South County board. Each board gives up to $15,000. The maximum amount is $3,000 per per award amount to youth-led projects. We encourage you to keep this grant opportunity in mind if your organization has a youth component. They typically become available in the early fall, so about, I want to say late July, and they're available through October. And then for more information about grant making programs, I encourage you to visit our website. Nancy's going to drop the link in the chat for you. And then just a quick note, because I know some folks question it, the fall grant cycle will be opening in late July as well. And then if you haven't already, I also do encourage you to sign up for our listserv so that you don't miss out on any future funding opportunities or any current news that is going on at the fund. And the way to sign up for that is by visiting our website. At the bottom of any page, there's a join our community banner where you can input your email. And that way you can stay up to date on any news with the fund. All right. Very quickly, I did want to highlight that you can find an extensive list of our grant history on our website. This can give you an idea of the type of organizations that we fund or the projects that we funded in recent history. You can learn more about the social change that we are seeking to fund and hopefully help you understand more about the types of requests that will fit within the fund guidelines. I believe we have the past either 5 or 6 years currently available, and it includes the spring, the fall, the multi-year, and the youth making change grants.
And Tanya, we did have a quick question come in from Karen, which is a great question, asking if agencies can apply for multiple programs annually or just once.
That is a great question, Karen. Typically, no. When we have current grantees, the funds need to be depleted before they can qualify again. But depending on the work that is being done, for example, if your organization is countywide and the project is in South County that is currently funded and you're looking for funding in a North County project, you can contact us to see if that will fit the criteria. But yes, typically current grantees are not eligible until the funds are depleted.
Great, thanks, Tanya. Now moving on to our funding guidelines here at the Fund for Santa Barbara, which I think segues well into what Tanya was just speaking to. But we have several guidelines that we utilize when looking for projects to fund. So the first is that, and I just want to make a note that when we draft our funding guidelines, we were very intentional in the language we chose to highlight the type of work that we support. This goes back to our mission to support social change work that addresses the root causes of social inequities. You'll want to make sure that you familiarize yourself with the guidelines and that your project addresses or aligns with at least one. These are also available on our website, and you'll see them repeatedly addressed throughout the application process. And we invite applications from organizations that, number one, actively support anti-discrimination based on race, sex or gender, age, religion, languages spoken, or immigration status. We believe that social justice issues are not monolithic, and we encourage proposals that are intersectional and inclusive. Number two, we actively support communities marginalized by power structures to engage in dialogue and actions that seek to counter social injustice. A huge part of social inequities in this county has to do with the way in which, has to do with which leaders are where and who hold positions of power. We also actively work to improve the rights of workers and their families whose living conditions have been marginalized. We also fund projects that promote the cultural life of underserved communities and support the activities of cultural workers. To us, this means working to address some of the inequities inherent in the underserved, historically marginalized communities who face greater social disparities. We also fund projects that promote self-determination and leadership development in low-income and disenfranchised communities. We at the fund are committed to removing barriers and providing support to folks with lived experiences that have been the most effective. We also support projects that promote global peace and organize locally for just policies. This means everything from local engagement to engagement on policies that goes beyond our immediate community, like state or federal. We also support projects working on building coalitions to enhance improving environmental justice and address climate change, especially organizing a constituency usually without access to decision makers. We support projects that engage in collaborative action and coalition building to strengthen movement ecosystems, ones that work against community violence and actively support recovery and restorative justice activities and initiatives. We believe that a key component of real change is movement building, and we strongly support coalition building and cross-movement solidarity. We also support projects that operate in a democratic manner, are responsive to and directed by the constituency being served. This to us means that the folks directly impacted by the injustices should be involved in the strategy, program development, and have decision-making capacity. The key here is that we want to support constituency-led work. This can include senior management, staff, communities, etc. Now, the GMC uses the funding priorities that we just described above to drive their proposal review and base their assessments about funding projects. They're in alignment with the values of the fund and help guide the deliberation process. So the guidelines that GMC follows, they ask the question, does this project have the potential to create or advance social, economic, political, and or environmental change? We ask that you please refer to the fund guidelines. As we mentioned, we're a movement building foundation and our guidelines hold our values at their core. We really ask, do projects align with the fund's values? When considering the priorities, our GMC asks, are there elements of community organizing, lobbying, direct action, base building, coalition, or legal strategy? Basically trying to get at, does the project address the root causes of the issue? Our GMC members also consider access to funding. So they ask, does this project lack access to traditional funding? Would the project go forward without support from the fund? We are really intentional about supporting grassroots organizations, new emerging organizations, and organizations that aren't necessarily at the top of the list for getting funding. And we ask, what is the funding trend for this type of work? The GMC also considers critical timing and need and asks the questions, does the organization have the capacity to reach their social change goals? Are the key players familiar with other organizations in the same field to further the goals of movement building? The GMC also looks at impact of funds and ask, how clear is the budget outline? How well does the budget support the project's social change goals? Will funding help start up the organization, stabilize the organization, and or leverage underfunding sources? Again, really looking at what's the social change of the project. And lastly, the GMC considers regional equity. So will this project help the grant making committee achieve its objective of providing equity in funding throughout Santa Barbara County? Now, we've talked quite a bit about what we do fund, but I think it's also important to emphasize what we do not fund. So we do not fund political campaigns that support a candidate or a political party. We don't fund private interests. We're interested in public interest. We do not fund direct labor organizing. We do not fund direct support to individuals. We do not support or do not fund building improvements, as well as capital ventures, for example, office equipment, machines, or vehicles. And we also do not fund projects that are located outside of Santa Barbara County. So looking at the eligibility oops, Tanya, is this where you're jumping in?
Yeah, I can jump in.
Okay, great.
Thank you. So your project should meet the following in order to be eligible for funding from the fund. You must meet the guidelines and priorities that Kathleen just so with you. Your organization should have a tax ID number or an employer identification number if you're applying as unincorporated, or a fiscal sponsor that is a tax exempt that you can use their tax ID number. You must have an organizational bank account. Grant checks cannot be made out to individuals. If you do not have an organizational bank account, but you do have a fiscal sponsor, we can use the fiscal sponsors. And then you must not be currently funded by the fund, which was something that was previously asked. And then your budget must span from in this case, for the spring, the funds will become available in June. So the funding for the 12 months would be from June 2022 to June 2023. And that is the timeline that your activity should span. All right. we have an entirely electronic grant process. To apply for any grant at the fund, you will be redirected from our grant website to our grantee portal that is housed at Submittable. You will need to create a free Submittable account. And I encourage you to use the email address that is linked to the organization that you're submitting the grant for, because it will be the email that will be our primary point of contact with you with any grants related information. Important to note that our grants platform, unfortunately, is not supported on Internet Explorer. So Google Chrome, Firefox, Safari, any of those should be fine. And we do have some benefits to having this entirely electronic process. The first is that you can invite collaborators. So you can collaborate with your colleagues in the application and fill it out simultaneously. And there is an autosave feature in addition to just a regular save feature that is automatically saving your work so that you never have the fear of your work getting lost. And I'll show you more of those features when we actually jump into the application itself. If for whatever reason you find that the application is not accessible to your needs and would like technical assistance, please do not hesitate to contact us at grants@fundforsantabarbara.org so that we can provide the necessary support to get your proposal submitted. All right, we're going to jump into the application now. I just need to shift gears a little bit. Let me see if it allows me to do that. 1 second. Okay. I think we're back on. So when you go to our website and you're redirected, you'll see something like this, the fund for Santa Barbara. It's at submittable.com. If you don't have an account, you'll be asked to create one. I do have an account, so I'm just going to go ahead and log in, and then I'll walk you through the application process. Once you've logged in and you've gone through all the technicalities of it, this is what the application will look like. The first thing I want to note is the Invite Collaborators button will be found on the top right corner here. There's some key or hints that will be highlighted in red throughout the application, like any questions that are required and any important dates like this. There is a submitter resource center that you can visit with any technical issues or questions pertaining to the Submittable platform itself. They are very responsive and available, I believe, 24/7. Once you get through that point, you'll see some key information about the application itself, the grant funding period, as I mentioned, June 2022 to June 2023. We do have a link here that will link you back to our website if you want to have the guidelines and priorities available to you as you're going through the application. They are available on our website at all times, so you can find them there as well. And then this link here is an application checklist that we created to help ensure that you are able to submit a complete application within the time frame that the application is available, and to let you know which documents you're going to need to submit in case you need time to gather those ahead of time.
Anya, can I add something?
Of course.
On the project period being 1 year, you don't actually have to, your project doesn't have to extend the entire year, but it cannot go beyond a year.
Yes.
So, you know, you could have a 6-month project period, for example, if that's what you need.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for clarifying that, Suzanne. That is correct. The maximum funding is 12 months, but if you do have a shorter grant project period, that is wonderful as well. Okay, so here's another little red tab thingy clue that I had mentioned earlier. Another clue that we have is some of these have word limits, and they'll always tell you what the word limit is, and they'll actually count down as you're typing. And then we have other clues that we've added as well to help really emphasize what the question is trying to gather. And so this is the first question. draft a summary of your application that addresses the following: the start date, the mission, what your proposal seeks to accomplish, and what the funding is going to pay for. This is a summary that we share with the fund board. The grant making committee has access to your entire application. This specifically shared with the fund board. Because it's a summary, I actually encourage you to fill it out towards the end after you've completed the application narrative, so you have a clear understanding of what exactly it is that you're summarizing. None of the questions need to be answered in order. You can skip around. So that's also another cool feature for you to know about. Then you get into organization information. Your name as it is listed in the IRS exempt organization list. If you're an unincorporated group, just put your group name that you are planning to be called. And then your project name, give your project a name. And then we'll ask, does your organization have 501c3 or 501c4 status? If your organization does, and wonderful, you can select yes and move on and tell us which tax exempt status it is, either 501c3 or 501c4, and then give us your tax ID number. If you do not have 501c3 or 501c4 status, you can select no. And then we'll ask you, are you applying with a fiscal sponsor? If you are, great. Tell us that you are, and then give us the name of your fiscal sponsor and the tax exempt status of your fiscal sponsor. If you do not have tax exempt status and you're not applying with a fiscal sponsor, that is what we consider an unincorporated group status. So you would say, no, I don't have a tax exempt status and I'm not applying with a fiscal sponsor. And then you'll see the option to apply as an unincorporated group. So I select that. And then I do want you to note that if you are applying with an unincorporated group status, you will need to submit an employer identification number. We have the link to the IRS website here to get that process started. And then later in the application, we'll ask you for a statement of charitable purpose. So for now, I'm going to act as if I am applying with 501c3 status. We'll ask you for your organization name. Or address, sorry, city, state, zip, county, organization phone, organization website, social media handles if you have them, not required. And then we'll move down to your make check payable to, and this is your organizational bank account. It was one of the requirements that I mentioned earlier. We cannot make checks to individuals, so this is going to be your organizational bank account. And then we'll ask for the bank account financial institution. Some folks have very specific places where they do banking, for example, Santa Barbara Bank and Trust on Hope Avenue. So you can put that information there. And then we'll jump into project information. The first question is asking for, in 25 words or less, tell us what exactly the funds will be used for. I forgot to mention earlier, both the summaries, this brief summary and then the longer summary that is shared with the board should be written in third person present tense and not in like bulleted list or numbered list. Write it as if it's going to be a very tiny paragraph. For example, funding will support X, Y, and Z, and so on and so forth. Here in the amount requesting section, you will tell us how much money you are requesting from the fund for this cycle, for this grant. Of course, not to exceed $10,000, as that is our max. Below that, you will check off that you understand that the funds must be expended within that 12-month time frame. As Suzanne mentioned, it doesn't have to expand the full 12 months, but it can't go further. And then you'll tell us the type of request that it is, whether it's general support or program project, and if the project has received funding from the fund in the past. And then you'll give us your total project budget. This is specifically for the project that you are applying for funding for in this application. You'll give us the project budget period start and the project budget period end. And then we'll also ask for your total organizational budget. And this is your organization or group, not your fiscal sponsor's organizational budget. Just keep that in mind. The only time that these might be the same, the total project budget and the organizational budget, is if you're applying for general support and the general support is supporting the total organization as a whole. So the project budget would be the organizational budget. And then you'll tell us when your fiscal year starts. And then we move on to issue areas. Here is where you can select the issue area specifically pertaining to the grant. And of course, not everything that your organization is engaged in. There's, as you can see, it's a long list of issue areas that you can select from, or you can press other, as I have done here, and then you can specifically tell us any other issue areas that were not listed that you are engaging in. Use commas to separate. We know there's a lot of overlap, so try limiting to key issue areas pertaining to the specific grant. Same thing with strategies. We have a list here, but if the strategy that you plan to employ is not listed, you can go ahead and add it. Oh, actually, that might be better. And then we move on to constituency. That we have some constituencies listed for you there, but you can also add yours as well by hitting the other button here. And lastly is geography. So if your project is going to be taking place countywide, you can select countywide. We assume that employs everything and you can move forward. If you are specifically focusing on an area of the county, like say North County, you can select North County and then tick off the cities that you're going to be working on specifically. All right, and then we go to contact information. This is your contact information as the submitter. So we want your first name, last name, your title or role, your email, and your phone number. And I didn't mention this earlier, but I do want to note that regardless of who the collaborators are, the person that originates the draft of the application will be the only person that is able to submit. So just keep that in mind as you are inviting your collaborators. And I do see a hand raised.
Yes, I was. This is Pastor Wiley. I was asking on the total amount allowed to apply for this year. Is it $10,000 or can we apply for multiple years, up to 3 years?
Thanks, Pastor Wiley. That's a great question. The multi-year funding is only available in the fall. So the spring cycle is only a 12-month length funding, and that is only $10,000 max.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. Thank you for your question. And then we'll ask, should this proposal be selected for a site visit? Is the person submitting, AKA you, the person who should be contacted to make those site visit arrangements? If you are, wonderful, you select yes and you move forward. If you're not, you'll select no, and then you'll actually tell us who we should contact for a site visit. This can be when, for example, you're the grant writer for the organization, but you're not the project manager, and the project manager is going to be hosting the site visits. And I do see a hand up, so I will pause. Karen?
Hi, good morning. I had a follow-up question to the previous one. So clearly it might be more appealing to apply for 3 years since you get the same amount, but for 3 years instead of 1. So what's the difference between eligibility and depth of the project that would qualify for 3 years versus these that are just for 1 year?
That is a wonderful question. So first and foremost, there's only 3 multi-year grants awarded per year in the fall. So it's much more competitive. And secondly, applicants must meet like a pre-screening requirement, and that is that they have to have a significant funding history with the fund. So new applicants wouldn't be eligible to apply for a multi-year grant from the fund.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Yeah, of course.
Can I add something there, Tanya?
Yes, of course.
The idea of the multi-year funding option is really to help an organization that's already started up and is already making progress in their work, but to engage in a broader capacity with the community and hopefully be part of the coalition building that the fund has as a significant strategy.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Suzanne. Okay, so back to site visits. As I mentioned, if you're not the site visit contact, tell us who should be contacted for that site visit. And then here you'll list off the best days or times for a site visit interview. Keeping in mind that the grant making committee is scheduling multiple site visits at a time. The more availability that you're able to provide, the better it will be for them to Tetris in the site visits. If you're available at any time, you can just select this anytime box and we'll assume all of the availability. And if not, you can tell us specifically you're available Monday morning and Monday afternoon, for example. And then we move on to the application narrative. Excuse me. So again, just a quick note that each question does have a word limit, and you'll see those word limits here along with the countdown as you're actually typing. We do want you to focus specifically on the question that is being asked and ask that you draft succinct answers, keeping in mind that the grant making committee has to read all of the proposals that are submitted. You want to make sure that they're not having to sift through a lot of fluff words, and that they understand what your project is aiming to conduct. So a pro tip for you all is to break down and answer specifically what is being asked, and to try not to get lost in the weeds. And then, yeah. Oh, and then please avoid using acronyms. Just don't assume that they're going to know exactly what you're referring to. We have a lot of acronyms for a lot of different wonderful programs in the community, and we want to make sure that nothing gets lost in translation. All right, so the first is going to ask you to summarize how the project came to be and what your specific request to the fund is. So your history, your purpose, your objectives. And that's a long summary outline, as opposed to the short summaries that I've already touched on in the past. The second question is asking you to keep in mind the fund's priorities as stated in the guidelines that Kathleen went over with you earlier. How is this project social change rather than traditional charity or direct service? Remember, we are looking to fund systemic change that addresses the root causes of social inequities. And she gave a lovely example earlier, but think of, providing something to underprivileged people is more of a direct service, as opposed to social change would be lobbying the school board or the county or the city council to make a systemic change. The grant making committee will prioritize projects that address institutional or policy or systemic change. And then we do have a definition of social change for you here as well to keep in mind. And then we'll ask you how the project is enhancing community capacity to build and mobilize power and addressing the root causes of your issues. And we'll ask if you're working with other organizations and developing effective networks. This is one of the priority items that the grant making committee considers. We are a movement building organization, and we want to support coalitions and coalition building so that we are hopefully enabling a bridge between gaps and silos and helping groups come together and work together. So we do want to see how and if you're partnering with other organizations who are doing similar work. And be transparent, if you're not working with others, that's okay. We're not being prescriptive. We're not telling you have to. Just tell us why not. What are the challenges that are keeping you? Maybe you have different priorities or different missions. If you are working with community partners, we'll ask you to tell us who you're working with. So for example, if you're collaborating with someone, you can select the collaborative button here, and then you can tell us who exactly you're collaborating with. And again, just use commas to separate. And then we'll ask you to describe your organizational structure and governance. And this goes back to the funding guideline of funding constituency-led work. So talk about how involved your constituency is in the decision-making process and how they affect the work that you do. We do want to know whether this is a top-down project or if you're engaging the constituency from the ground up and building it up as you go with their say and their decision-making power. Just overall, we want to see partnerships where the constituency that you're aiming to serve is part of the decision-making group. Then we'll ask you for 2 references, any members of your constituency or key stakeholders who know your project and can speak to it. Here is where we will ask for the activity timeline. As I mentioned earlier, because the funding window is from June to June 2022 to June 2023, your activities should fall within that time frame. If you have work happening beforehand, that's wonderful, and you can include it here, just keeping in mind that the fund doesn't fund work retroactively, so we won't be able to pay for work that has already taken place. Objectives are what you're going to do or hope to accomplish, and the activities are how you're going to do that. Tell us what your anticipated outcomes are here, so that you can explain to us more later in the proposal how it all ties in together. And then just very quickly, keeping in mind the activity timeline and the budget should support each other and go hand in hand. If you can, we encourage you to work on these together so that you are thinking of your activities as monies that you're going to need funding for. One tip that I've heard Suzanne give others is to keep a running sheet as you're identifying the activities and that you plan to do, and identify as you're going how much it's going to cost and what you're going to need to do it. For example, personnel or supplies. And then, of course, I'll go into more detail about that in a moment when we get to the actual budget timeline or the budget. And then here we'll ask what your anticipated outcomes are and how you will evaluate the effectiveness or impact of the project within your proposed timeline. For this question, think about what is going to be different by virtue of you doing this project. What is going to be different in your organization, in your constituency, or in your community. Applicants do get to set their own determinants of success. Just tell us what your anticipated outcomes will be and how you plan to evaluate that. All right, next is how will the project's benefits and outcomes strengthen the organization's mission? How will your organization keep the project's benefits ongoing and for how long? We want to see how the work supports the narrative of the proposal and the objectives of the project. We want to see how this project relates to your overall mission or goal of your organization. So we do want you to try to connect the dots and articulate how it relates to your organization's mission. All right, this is where we get into the financial information section. The budget will be just a couple questions down lower, but before we get to that, we'll ask about any major fundraising strategies for this specific project that you're seeking funding for. This can be outreach campaigns via social media, individual donor appeals, grant writing to other foundations maybe, just any other type of fundraising strategies that you're employing for this proposal or for this project that you're proposing. And then what resources aside from funding does your organization have access to and need? So the have access to is looking at what kind of community buy-in does your project have. Maybe your boards participate in some of the work, or you have constituents who allow you to use their space for free so that you don't have to pay for space elsewhere. This is really your opportunity to flex your muscle on how you've been resourceful and creative with the resources that you've been able to have. And then the second part about telling us what resources you need, it doesn't necessarily mean that we can address all the needs, but it helps us keep in mind as we're networking with other foundations and advocating for our constituents. As well as, for example, Kathleen here, creating technical assistance and capacity building workshops and materials for the future. This can be anything from meeting spaces, board training materials, supplies, anything like that. Let us know. And again, I do encourage you to reach out to our Kathleen, our capacity building manager, with any specific technical assistance questions that your organization has or needs. And Kathleen will put her email in the chat one more time. All right, I'm gonna pause for a second. I haven't missed any questions in the chat or anything.
Nope, I
Cool.
think we're good.
Great, okay. So this is your proposed project financial information budget essentially. And again, it's going to extend from June 2022 to June 2023, the length of the funding. We've already filled in the fund here for you. Here's where you'll include the amount that you're specifically requesting from the fund. It's marked as pending and it's anticipated in June 2022, which is when the funds will be dispersed. In this imaginary project that I already started, I'm also asking for funding from the Santa Barbara Foundation for $500, and that funding is pending and it'll be available to me hopefully in March 2022. And then I'm asking for another foundation grant, and this one, let's say it's already been received and I'm starting to do some work with that. And then I want you to note that the amounts should be listed as just plain text numbers, no special characters, so that it is automatically adding up for you here. The formula won't work if there's any commas or special characters here. And then the financial information section is divided into two sections. The first section is the income, so all of the sources of funding, the total income from all of your sources of funding for this specific project, not for your entire organization. And then the second section is the expenses. And as I mentioned earlier, the expenses should closely align with your activities. 1 second. Here, I do want to say that it goes a long way to use the explanation column to your full advantage and give the grant making committee as much detail as you possibly can to break down the expenses. So for example, I've included this expense for food. The total of the expense is $2,000, but I'm only requesting $1,000 from the fund. And then I'm breaking down the actual food cost. I think this number is too low. Maybe I should say it's 200 people at $25, and that's how that total amount came to be. The math is completely off, but just to give you an idea of the breakdown that will help the grant making committee understand the expenses better. It doesn't necessarily mean too that if the total expense is $2,000 and you want to request the full amount from the fund for $2,000, that is perfectly okay too. I want to note that the reason why I have it broken down like that is because I am requesting $9,000 for this workshop, and this workshop is costing me $10,000. But if you'll remember that the maximum amount requested from the fund should be $10,000. So here's my tabulated $10,000 that I'm requesting from the fund. And this is just a reminder reminding us that it should not exceed $10,000. My total project is going to cost me $12,000. And I have these other sources of funding that are helping me pay that amount so that I'm able to only need to ask $10,000 from the fund. And a good thing to keep in mind is that the total income, all of your sources of funding should match the total expenses. So all of the expense categories and activities and broken down items that you're going to need to make your project a reality. So once those are matching, you'll see that this bottom row here, it verifies that there's a match, and then it balances itself out to zero. If it was not matching, you would see it tell you that it's not matching, and it would ask you to make the necessary edits to make it match. There's some notes here that I want you to pay special attention to. Income and expense summaries for the proposed project only, again, not for your entire organization. Provide detailed notes for each expense category. There's a little sample here as well. Total income in section 1 must match total expenses in section 2. This is very important. And then the amount requested from the fund must not exceed $10,000. And it should actually match the amount that you're specifically requesting for in this grant. So if the amount you're requesting is $8,000, then this amount requested from the fund column here would be $8,000. And yeah, again, don't add any special characters, just keep it to plain text numbers. And then there will be a question asking you to verify that the total income and the total expenses match and balance out to zero. If they do, wonderful, you'll select yes and you'll move on. However, if they do not, you'll get a note reminding you that they must match and to go back and do the work to make them match. Once you've done that, you'll come back and say yes, and then that will disappear. And then you're going to confirm that the total amount requested from the fund does not exceed the $10,000 and matches the requested amount of this grant proposal. So that's this amount here. And yes, it doesn't exceed $10,000. So I can confirm and then move forward. And then this is, if full funding is not available, what are your organization's highest budget priorities? So it's these expense items here. What will your organization or project not be able to move forward without? So we'll ask for your top 5 budget priorities. And then, excuse me, we'll go into the second to last section, which is the additional information section. And this is additional information that we'll ask all applicants. The first is a list of all key participants involved with your project. Again, highlighting constituency-led work. So we want to see the title, the role, the key responsibilities, and the demographics of the key participants within your project. And then if you are a 501c3, 501c4, we'll ask for a list of your board of directors. If you're unincorporated, we'll ask for a list of your governing bodies, so the decision makers and who they are. Same thing, you'll give us their information here. And if you're applying with a fiscal sponsor, we'll ask for the board of directors of the fiscal sponsor, and you can include their information here. And then we'll ask you to upload 2 things, and this is gonna come in, this is where the application checklist comes in handy so that you know which documents you need to gather ahead of time. The first is a copy of your organization's 501c3 Irs Determination Letter. There is a sample here that you can click on to see what letter we're specifically looking for. And then you can visit the IRS website linked here to learn more about their tool to get those documents in line. When you're ready to upload it, you just have to drop it into this box, drag and drop. Same thing with this one. This is a copy of your State of California Franchise Tax Board Determination Letter. There's a sample linked for you here that you can take a look at, and then we linked their website where you can actually automatically generate an entity status letter that we will accept in lieu of the original sample letter. So these are all links for you to use to your advantage and upload the proper documentation that we're going to need in order to consider your application complete. The final attachment is an optional attachment. You do not have to do it, but we give you the opportunity to upload a document of your choice that helps the grant making committee understand your organization or project better. And this can be anything from a flyer of the program that you're applying for that has happened in the past. It can be a video of an interview that was done with your organization about the project that you're planning on doing, anything like that, a brochure, an article. The possibilities are endless now that we're in the tech world. The final part is this disclaimer and agreement. So you'll certify that the information in the application is true and accurate, and then you'll endorse it with your full name and the date. And we'll also ask you to send this to a member of your board of directors if you're a 501c3 or 501c4, or a member of your governing body if you're applying as unincorporated. I do want to note that you do not have to send this at the very end, and I actually encourage you to send this sooner rather than later so that the board member has enough time to sign and return this to us by the deadline. So you can input their name, their email here, add a personal message, and then send request. And then if you're done, you can hit apply, or if you're going to come back and work on it later, you can save the draft. And we can go back to the application or to the presentation. We have just a few more slides for you, and then we can open it up for the Q&A. Okay, let me close this calendar stuff. And here I have for you the cycle timeline. As you know, we released our request for proposals last Friday, January 28th. We have an optional proposal review deadline that is Monday, February 21st at 5 p.m. This goes back to the technical support that the fund staff provides. And I'm going to give you more details about that, but this is the deadline for you to keep in mind. And then the applications, of course, are due on Monday, February 28th at 11:59 p.m. It is an electronic process, so the deadline will be 11:59 p.m. If you're trying to submit at midnight, unfortunately, it will be closed. So please just keep that in mind. And we do encourage you to submit sooner rather than later so that you don't run into any technical difficulties at the very last minute. Funding notifications will be made in June, and then funds are going to be dispersed after that. And then just keeping in mind that with this this year-long funding, we do require two grant reports. One is a progress report that is going to be due in December via submittable, and then the other is going to be due at the end of the year-long funding when the funds are expended, or if your funds are expended sooner, then you can submit it sooner as well. But I do have it set for the deadline to be end of June. Site visits. During the first screening meeting, the grant making committee members will determine who will be receiving a site visit. Not everyone will receive a site visit, but if your project is selected for a site visit, the grant making committee members will contact you directly to set it up with that information that you included in the application as to who should be contacted for a site visit. They'll ask to meet with 3 or 4 members of your organization of your choice. And then on their end, the site visit teams will consist of 2 grant making committee members and 1 fund staff member. Because of the pandemic, these past couple cycles, most of the site visits have been conducted online via Zoom, and that's still going to be an option this time around, but we are leaving it up to the discrepancy of the grant making committee and the applicants, depending on their comfort level and how they would like to schedule that out. Oh, went backwards. 1 second. Upcoming deadlines. So here I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that optional pre-application review. Staff, as I mentioned, staff are going to be your allies. So we are going to be accepting this pre-application review where we'll review your proposal, your proposed project, and share some feedback that may be useful in filling out your application. We encourage you to take advantage of this if you're having trouble determining whether your project meets the social change component of our guidelines. And in order to do so, what we ask that you submit is a 1-page summary max of what it is you're trying to accomplish, a list of key organizers and participants, and a rough draft of your budget. The submission will be have to be via email by 5 p.m. on Monday, February 21st. And the email to submit that to is grants@fundforsantabarbara.org. Nancy, can you put that in the chat for me, please, and thank you. And then, as we mentioned, the application deadline is February 28th at 11:59 p.m. And that wraps up for me on my end. Now we can open it up to any questions that folks might have. And I know I just overloaded you with a ton of information, so thank you for bearing with me.
Thank you so much, Tanya. We did not have any more questions come into the chat, but as Tanya mentioned, if any of you have questions about anything that was covered, or maybe even more specific questions, please feel free to raise your hand using the Zoom feature or just hop off mute and ask us. Thanks.
I'd like to suggest a tip to people, and that is to really familiarize yourself with all the questions ahead of time rather than just start writing in the first question and so on. But really familiarize yourself with the questions and possibly even do a draft of your narrative in a Word document so that you really are creating a logical flow and answering the question completely. And that might help you to edit for the word count as well. But in any case, I just make sure that you know where you're going in the whole application.
That is a great tip. Thanks, Suzanne.
Thank you, Suzanne. And I believe Tanya mentioned it at the beginning, but if you want more information on writing grant proposals for social change, we actually have a previous workshop that's been recorded and posted to the Fund for Santa Barbara's website with our capacity building under our capacity building program page. So that can also be a great resource as you're putting together a proposal focused on social change. And I'll post that link in the chat here.
Yes, that is a great resource. Thank you, Kathleen. Okay, well, I'm gonna hang on for a little bit longer, but if there are no more questions, I do want to honor all of your times. I want to say thank you very much for joining us this morning. I hope you found it informational. And if you do run into any issues or have any questions along your journey in drafting this proposal, please don't hesitate to reach out. The contact information is posted for you there, and we're always available to support you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Maria. Happy Friday. I hope you all have a lovely weekend.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks.
So
Thank
much.